Okay.
I had a friend that...
Wait. My name's Barbara Garrity Blake, and I am near Englehard in Waupoppin, North Carolina, talking to Mr. Marco Gibbs on January 25th, 2016, and this is for the Coastal Voices Portlight Project. And Marco is just getting ready to tell me about the origin or the translation of the name Waupoppin.
Done a lot of Indian research in this area, especially this because it was an Indian village here before the whites settled in this area. And I had a friend that was trying to research and translate some of the Indian words that was in use at this time, and the word Waupoppin. The best he could get a translation on it through the stuff that he had done was Wa meant the man, and from pop in, which probably meant the village, the Indians that were here. So it was more like the man. In the Indian word translations, they always mean two or three things. It's very rarely that they just mean one thing.
So it meant what?
The man from pop in.
Oh.
It was probably some very important person.
Okay, well, Marco, since we started off with Waupoppin, can you tell that story about, what is the history of this settlement here?
It goes back to July the 12th, 1585, when John White, along with a small group, and they had come into Ocracoke Inlet and run a ship aground. That was the second voyage by the English. And they run the ship aground on the waning of a full moon. So they knew that the tide wouldn't be high again enough to get that ship off until the next full moon. So they spent that month exploring the Sound and different areas up the Pamlico River. And the reason they were able to do that was the air was much clearer back then, and more land above sea level. There was huge trees all the way down the Outer Banks, a lot of trees, more so than today, a lot more. And there was more trees in this area and more huge trees on both areas. And the air was probably much, much clearer than it is today. And they were able to see back and forth. So they would see the smoke from the villages, so they knew back where the villages were, and they could tell by the trees and things. And these Indians were Algonquin. The word means coastal people, or people who eat saltwater fish. So their villages are always very near the water. And they would travel by dugout canoe. They weren't the Bigfoot travelers like the Tuscarora, who paralleled them all the way down from probably the Great Lakes area. And they ended up even further south than the Algonquin. But they were the big foot traders. The Algonquins were the big water traders. They traveled back and forth across the Sound on a regular basis, especially in good weather, with large dugout canoes. Probably most of them were around 35, 40 feet, but there was some known to be 75, 80 feet. It was told that they could carry as many as 70 warriors in one of those larger dugouts. So they were able to keep their enemy, the Tuscarora, from taking over this area. Even though they traded back and forth a lot, the Tuscarora were trying to take over this area for the trade items that were here, and that was mainly the conch shell.
Were they called the Algonquin, or was there a more specific name?
It was Algonquin, and they stretched all the way across Canada and down into what I consider about the Pamlico River area. They still had some influence a little further south, but...
Okay, so they weren't Machapunga?
That's all Tuscarora names.
Oh.
And that's where the Tuscarora... For some reason, the Indians on the Outer Bank built up some resistance to the English diseases. Now, they still died, but not like they did here on the mainland. So undoubtedly we know that there was some previous contact with Indians through an Italian by the name of Verrazano, who traveled for the French king, come here in 1524 and 35. And he was later, he was all down in the Moorhead area, in your area, exploring, and then come up here and could not find an inlet to come in. And saw smoke on the shore in the Indian village, and it was rough. They couldn't come ashore with their boats, so he sent his best swimmer ashore. And he swam ashore, and in the process of swimming ashore, coming in the surf to beat him up so bad he was knocked unconscious. And Verrazano's off there watching him with his looking glass, and he sent him ashore now with a bag of trinkets and bells and whistles and odd and end things for gifts for the Indians. And when he washes up on the shore, he sees the Indians run down and grab him, and they pull him up on the shore where they see him building a fire. So he just assumed that they were going to cook him and eat him.
Oh my gosh.
So, but they didn't. They took his clothes off and hung his clothes on racks over the fire and dried his clothes. And he eventually come to. They gave him food and water.
Yeah.
And
wow.
he got butter, and he gave him the trinkets and stuff. And then he motioned that he wanted to go back to the ship, to the water. Mm-hmm. So they let him down to the water and allowed him to swim back, and he was able to swim back to the ship. Mm-hmm. So, and I read some of this stuff about Verrazano in historical magazines from your area.
Okay.
And
yeah. So, go ahead.
Verrazano still sailed up the coast, not seeing any inlets for some reason, and maybe there weren't any at that time. But he could look across there in places, and he could see all this water, which we know as originally from the Indians, from the English, as Pamtica sound, which is Pamlico sound now. But back then, not knowing what it was, Verrazano named it the Isthmus of Verrazano, or the Verrazano Sea.
Uh-huh.
So that's the first name of the Pamlico Sound.
Wow.
Really. And he travels on up in the Currituck area. And he was able to get ashore up there, and he goes inland. They were inland maybe a mile, and come across a bunch of Indian maidens picking grapes and berries and stuff. Mm-hmm. And he tries to capture them. Then they did. They captured 15 or 20, and they're dragging them. They're screaming, dragging them back to the ship. They were going to take them with them, and they were screaming so loud that all of them got away except for one, and they almost got her to the shore, and she was screaming so loud that they couldn't stand it, and they almost were following, screaming, that they let her go. They left them. So, somebody was screaming very, very loudly.
So, but getting back to Waupoppin, are you saying that this area right here was one of those Algonquin villages?
Right.
How many were there around here? Was this like the main one, or was this one of many?
Yeah. Going back to, Verrazano sailed on and out of this area, ended up in the New York area, and the Verrazano Bridge up in New York is named after him and all that. He was later killed by Indians up there on another voyage. He made several voyages. So, but anyway, in this area, the Algonquin were all in this area on the Outer Banks and here. The main village was at Roanoke, and the king was named Wangina. And when the English first came here in 1584, Wangina could not meet with them. He was at Man's Harbor. Now, there was all land across there. Deepest water was in ankle deep. They could walk all the way across between what's Man's Harbor to Manio, that area. But Wangina's brother was kind of in charge when he weren't. And his name was Grangimio, and he lived there at Roanoke. Wangina, 2 arrow wounds from fighting with the Tuscarora, recuperating in his village at Damascaput, which is near Man's Harbor. And 2 or 3 days went by. The English were anchored up there and didn't see any Indians. And all of a sudden, Grangimio takes his dugout canoe and he goes out and he goes and fishes what we would call a pine net. Today it was built with bamboo reeds, but it was shaped sort of like, we got our design for the pine net from
like a fishing weir?
Yeah. So that's where our modern day pine net come from, is from that design. And he took out a whole canoe full of fish and carried it to one English ship and gave it to him. And then he goes to another wire and gets another dugout canoe full of fish and carries it and gives it to the other English ships. That was the beginning of the friendship with the Indians. Mm-hmm. And the English first described them as being very large in stature, very healthy, yellow-toned skin. Grangimio invited the English in to eat fruits or grapes and all that kind of stuff, melons of all kinds, and he invited them into council meetings. And they were just amazed at it. But there's one thing in researching all this stuff on the Indians, there's one thing it's out there, you can find it, and I did. There's one thing that these Indians were doing, and if you come into another Indian's lodge or home, and you did not get offered food, the offense was so bad that they could kill you for that. So I don't know if it survived somehow, but most everywhere you go around here now, people invite you to eat, or a lot more so when I was growing up than now, but still a lot of people do it. Yeah, come on in and have something, you know.
Yeah. How
And
about that?
I don't know if it goes back to that Indian tradition or not, but
Wow.
it was an offense so bad you're deserving of death if you didn't get
Okay.
asked to eat
All right, so Marco, let's focus on.
on the Waupoppin.
Yeah.
Well, it was an Indian village. It's a later name. There probably was an earlier name of Algonquin, which I haven't been able to find. The main villages was the Roanoke, the Hatteras, or actually it was even called Croatan first, and then later Hatteras. The Waupoppin at Ocracoke, the Secondton at Bath, Belhaven area. It's hard to say which one. There is a major site they're looking at up in the Bath area that may turn out to be it. Aquascot, which is up on the Pungo River, and of course Pumyok, which was here. And there's been a lot of discussion about where was Pumyok. A lot of people thought it was at Waupoppin Bay, which Waupoppin is a little bit later name. That's more Tuscarora, like Waupoppin. But and of course we had the Matamesquite and the Machapungo. Those are later Tuscarora names. But these earlier Indians, I would say from all the reading I've done, Secondton was the major Indian site in this area. In fact, you'll see on some of the old maps, you'll see originally it was called Winganacoa, after Wingina, their king, all of this area. And it stretched probably from around Carlton all the way down, including Ocracoke, across the Bath, back up the Alligator River over here, and back to Mans Harbor, Manio area. And Wingina was king over all that area. So that originally you'll see Winganacoa. But then you'll see Secondton written in here. So Secondton had to have been a major village here on the mainland. But Pumyok was a pretty prominent village. And when you look at John White's paintings and all, you'll see, they talk about a king here. Or he had to be a lesser king than Wingina, because Wingina was a supreme king.
So Pumyok, and what was the what?
Secondton.
How do you spell that?
Secondton.
Secondton. And then Pumyok is Pamyok?
P-O-M-P-E-O-I-C.
Wait, P-O-M-P-E-O?
I-O-C. Let me see. It is spelled a couple of different ways.
Pumyok. So where did you take me that time when we went out and found that shell midden? What do you think that site is?
That is Pumyok.
Okay.
Now, I say Pumyok, and I used to believe this, what people would say was a summer camp and all this, but they've found when you find human remains in a site, it's a prominent village.
So what was that relationship to Waupoppin?
Waupoppin was a later off branch of that, probably, of those Indians.
So at what point did white people settle Waupoppin?
I would say probably around the 1650s they started. That's when the people started getting in here from Jamestown.
And how significant did that settlement become?
Weren't no Englehard to speak of. I mean, maybe a few families out there, 4 or 5 families, best I could tell.
I mean, Englehard was small?
Yeah, nothing, basically. Waupoppin was the place. It was water travel, basically. There was a road that come in from here, come in from Middleton area, come through what became Englehard, and come to here mostly. Of course, it went on, but it was nothing really at Englehard to start with.
So Waupoppin was a booming little place?
Yeah, at one time.
How many people do you think lived here?
From researching and all, it's hard to say, but I'd say around 300 people.
Oh my gosh.
There's 2 roads here, one west of here, one to the east. There was a school, there was churches and post office. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cemeteries in this area that I know of.
And what kind of industry?
It was this was a naturally deep place. That's why Englehard for some reason weren't deep, or it weren't as deep as here. That's why these people would come here, was because they traveled by boat, sailboat. So they settled here, and they would they ended up settling here and working out of here and carrying freight. And these boats ended up all the way down in the Caribbean, you know, trading, getting coffee and molasses, all kinds of stuff, you know, and carrying stuff out of here, grain and things.
Uh-huh. And did you say there was an old lumber sawmill?
Yeah, there's two here. The first steam sawmill in the county was right here back at the house.
Wow.
And right across the creek from it was later another sawmill.
So about what decade was the height of the Waupoppin settlement?
It's one of the earliest settlements here in the county. Probably not the oldest, but pretty close. Gull Rock is a very old settlement. So I'm thinking it was sometime around that time or a little later. But the reason they settled here too was the Indians had been living here and most of the land was cleared already.
Oh, okay.
The Indians were farming and hunting and fishing and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's why they settled here. It was very easy to do. The Indians were thinning out from the English diseases and stuff by this time, and numbers dropped. Yeah, so it was pretty easy for them to just move in.
Right. So for the sake of people listening to this, can you describe the community of Waupoppin today?
From what I read, it had to be a good, solid-based amount of people, and some good people and good, hard-working people. And the reason I say that is because the wealthiest man in this county, now there's probably been one or two since then, but one of the most wealthy people that ever lived in this county was named Nathan Northern, and he lived over here. He had huge sweet potato and wheat plantations over here. This place had some disasters that happened. There was a fire that went through. Well, there was a blizzard. And I'm trying to get which one was first. There was at one point there was a blizzard, a real hard blizzard that's well documented in the Hyde County history book that happened here. And I'm not sure on the dates on that. I have to go back and look. And there was also a fire here that went through here and burnt this place down. And the people that lived here got together and met on the shore of Mount Mesquite Lake on a Sunday afternoon and had a town meeting and to discuss whether to build back or not, and they decided to build back. So they built back.
And do you know about what year that was? Was it like the 1800s?
I'm thinking sometime after the Civil War, probably somewhere between 1870.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1880s is when most of the damages were done here. And all of these could have happened in the 1880s. I just have not sure on those dates.
Yeah.
But on this August 31st, 1886 was the one that was the deciding factor of people giving up here. And it still took them until 1970 for the last person to move.
Tell me about that deciding factor.
It was an earthquake known as the Charleston earthquake. And it's really interesting because there was an Indian lady who lived here that was a healer. Some people called her a witch. She wrote poetry for some of the Gazette newspapers. She's pretty educated, too.
What was her name?
I cannot recall her name, but she told people's fortunes. She was a palm reader. And you're going to be interviewing R.S. later. So his father used to, by the time the Englehard was becoming more popular by this time, late 1800s, he was watching oyster beds paid by the state, staying on an island out here called Mash Island and Methodist Creek. And he would come by. She was living in front of back where the trash dump is now. He would stop there and bring her mail from Englehard to her, and she'd read his poems each day that he'd bring the mail. So she later lived up here in front of the house. My father had gone to her, had something wrong with him, and she went out in the yard. His father had carried him. She went out in the yard, killed a wild goose, cut the gizzard out of it, come in, had my father laying on a cot, told him, said, put this in your hand and shut your hand around it. And she said a bunch of mumbo jumbo, he said, all over and rubbed him all over the chest with his hand holding that wild gizzard. And then she told him, well, actually she took the gizzard and done it, and then she put it in his hand and told him, shut his hand on it. So now you go throw this somewhere where you won't never step again. And because if you do step where you throw this, you step on it, it's whatever you got's going to come back onto you. So he threw it in the water that was deeper than what he was, so he knew he would never step there. So things like that. But she told the earth, foretold the earthquake, but not as an earthquake. She said that the end of the world was going to come on August 31st, 1886. And that afternoon, late, it started shaking. The houses, the people remember what she said, and it was mostly one-story buildings here, very few two-story buildings. And she went in, and or everybody ran in their house. They nailed up their windows, and they got inside and nailed up the doors. It was shaking so bad, and they thought it was the end of the world. And actually, it turned out to be the next morning when they got up and they walked outside, and there was a lot of farmers living here. And they walked out and they saw all this water in their alleys, and they said, well, where'd this water come from? It didn't rain last night. And when they got looking, it was bubbling up through the ground. That's where the land settled 15 to 18 inches overnight. So I don't know if it's, everything settled and just some areas were higher than others or not, but, it's just hard to say. But I do know that if Englehart had been higher than Waupoppin, I would have thought they would have settled Englehart, except for one reason: there wasn't a natural deep port there. This was naturally deep for some reason. So could have been an overflow from the lake or something. I don't know.
So this massive earthquake in Charleston, which is well documented, had reverberations all the way up and down the coast. And you're saying that the land here settled, and that was probably the deciding factor that people just couldn't farm here anymore, got too low?
Because the English described this area when they first come here as being very huge. White cedars, junipers, cypress, oaks, huge trees. Not only here, but on the Outer Banks also. And that the land, the farmers were tending, later they know that the farmers were tending land almost all the way to the water, to the Pamlico Sound. Maybe, not to it, but a very short distance. So it had to be very high land with very little marsh area. And you look out there now and you don't see nothing but marsh. But as late as 20 years ago, I could still see the old fence post in the marsh. They've rotted away now. You don't see them now, but you can still see the old farm ditches. On the aerial photographs, you can still see the rows where there were crops were.
Do you think the erosion has accelerated in recent years?
Yeah. We've had more severe hurricanes, and maybe more hurricanes, and that's had a lot to do with it. The rising of the sea level, about a foot a century, is doing it. So, but this area is first described as being very high, and now we see that it's getting very low.
So about when did people abandon Waupoppin altogether, you think?
The 1900 census shows there was 68 people still living here. So they didn't want to give up.
Yeah.
But the last person moved out in 1937.
And who lives in Waupoppin today?
Me. My wife.
You're the last man standing.
Yeah.
But you weren't born in Waupoppin, were you?
No. I was born in Columbia, but my parents lived in Englehart.
Oh, okay.
In 1951.
Huh. What brought them to Englehart?
Well, they grew up here. They lived up on what's North Lake Road now. My father, not far from where one of the water plants are there, up here by Patrick's Curve. His father had a big farm and all there. They had a bunch of small farms around different places. And my mother was that's down maybe a half a mile from where my father was. And her parents farmed. They got married, and I think one of the first places they lived was down at what they call White Plains, or Rattlesnake Canal area. You see my father say he had oystered, but he had the boat tied up here in Englehart, and by then he couldn't even afford a car, so he walked from where Rattlesnake Canal is, lived just this side of it.
Are you saying Rattlesnake Canal?
Well,
that
goes back to the Indians.
Okay. Well, don't go back to the Indians right now. We're going to stick to your dad. What was his name?
Nat Gibbs, Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Gibbs, and what was your mom's name?
Rena Bell Gibbs. Well, Spencer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And but he would walk all the way to work mornings to oyster before day, and then walk home in the evening. And that's a close to, well, probably 4 miles.
So he was a commercial fisherman?
Yeah. Well, they farm mostly.
And
but
farmer?
Commercial fish, too.
So did he...
Fish gill nets, and I've still got some of the things they used to make. They'd sit around nights when he was growing up and sew their own nets and meshes. And a 10-yard net, 15-foot net was big. A 10 or 15-yard net was like a big net.
How about that?
And they used different sizes. They used cardboard off of cigar boxes, different size boxes to make the size of the mesh that they wanted. And then I've got 1 or 2 of the old net needles they made to sew the nets with.
What kind of fishery? What was the big?
Mostly mullet. The old people loved mullets here, and there were a lot of them, and they were easy to catch and good to eat. I know I grew up eating mullets for breakfast, and salted mullets all the time. They'd catch a lot of them, and they salt them down.
Did your father use any of the fish buy boats? I mean, who bought the fish around here?
I'm not sure. There was I know they sold them. I know they peddled a lot of them door to door.
Oh.
And we even did that right on till I was probably about 13, 14 years old probably. We used to fish in the summertime, start late June and fish through early September or so.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I'd get back later on when I got going to school, and it was just, quit. I went back to school. But we'd done it all summer, not every night, but most nights.
And how about the freight boats? Do you remember any of those, or was that before your time?
It was basically before my time. I used to hear my father and them talk about it. They used to raise cattle and, pigs and chickens and all that stuff, and they had a boat there was about 30 foot long or 35 foot long, and they'd have a little small cabin on it, and they'd load a cow or 2 in it, and there's sometimes some chickens or pigs, hogs, whatever they thought people wanted, and they would go across the sign to Hatteras and sell them down in Hatteras mostly. That was the most easiest place to sell them because it's kind of the most hardest to get to. So.
What was the name of their boat?
I can't even remember the name of that old boat. It was around here for years. In fact, it sunk up here on what they called a wigwam shore. Other people ended up with that boat, and they used it for crabbing. In fact, the mother they were the last family to move out of Waupoppin here in 1937. This lady's son ended up with that boat, and he sold it to a relative. He used it for a while, and then he sold it to a relative, and the relative caught so many crabs one day crabbing up on the wigwam and got in a hard sideways wind with the boat loaded with crabs, and it sunk down on this end of what they call the wigwam up here on the other side of Longshore River.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it ended up with the boat that used to go to Hatteras. And that happened probably, that boat sunk, I'm thinking around the mid-70s, early 70s, something like that.
Did you say Hatteras was the hardest place to get to?
Well,
or the easiest place to get to?
It was kind of the hardest, it's kind of, to itself, being an island and all.
Yeah.
And, everything was done by boat, but I guess to get stuff, they had to get it from Washington or those areas, or from Manio, that area.
I got what you're saying.
And here it was just, pretty close, about 28 miles across here, Hatteras. So they weren't that far to go, just had to do it on good weather.
So was your father helping provide them with, say, fresh meat?
Yeah. And I showed you a desk that my grandfather had traded.
Tell me that story.
I think he traded a cow or a hog or something for it. It was either a hog or a cow for that desk, a writing desk.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the value of it was like $3 or something. And I know it seemed like I heard this story that my aunt had it restored by a Clark fellow here who was named Royden Clark. And I think he only charged her, and this was back in the 60s, early 60s, I think he only charged her $7 to, I won't say restore it, but to clean it up and varnish it and stuff.
Did you ever go with your father to Hatteras?
No, I didn't. It was basically, they were still doing it when I was young, but it was before I knew about it. I wouldn't have been 3 or 4 years old maybe.
Yeah.
So,
Huh.
And yeah, they got more into commercial fishing and got off the farm. My grandfather had died and all. And one of his sons ended up with a home place, mainly because he decided to stay here and keep on farming for my grandfather. And so all the other children decided to go off. My father ended up going to New York and running a bus and all kinds of stuff. Ended up at Ford Motor Plant. First a Ford Motor Plant there in Norfolk on the assembly line. Then later he went to New York. But and the other brothers, two of them got drafted, I think, in the Army. Around World War II. Just everybody seemed to do different things except for the one son, and he stayed there, and he ended up with everything. Except I had two uncles that got a farm together, and one uncle sold it out to the other uncle.
When you were growing up, were those fish houses there in Englehard?
Mm-hmm. There was one right there by the bridge, right connected with the old ice plant and all where we went. There was.
What was that one called?
It was just Englehard Light and Ice Company.
And what was the fish house called?
That was it. And they bought fish too.
Oh, of course they did.
Yeah. There was the electric company and the ice. They made ice there. It was all combined.
And so, can you tell me a little bit about the history of that ice plant?
I'm not sure about when it started, but I would think it was probably around the 30s. Late 30s probably. And what really got it going, they were selling ice locally and everything, and other places people coming here getting it. But the thing was, what really got it going was in the early 40s. By the mid 40s, people found out they could eat shrimp. And before that, they were feeding them to the hogs. My father said that nobody would think about eating one of them things. And they just got there and catch them by the thousands of pounds and feed them to the hogs.
And shrimp are very perishable.
Oh yeah,
you can salt a fish.
Yeah.
But so once the shrimp market started, people wanted ice.
Well, they had the ice to keep them, so that really boomed the ice making business.
Yeah. So do you remember that ice plant?
Yeah.
What was it like?
It was big diesel generators in there. I think there were about 16-cylinder engines, very long. And they seemed, best I can remember, there was 4 or 5 of them. And they supplied power for a pretty big area, all the way to Mans Harbor, Swan Quarter, Fairfield, Stumpy Point.
Wow.
So it was a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Let me pause this. Right. So we were talking about the ice plant.
And
can you tell me who came to the ice plant?
It was mostly fishermen. A lot of people would go there and buy ice, and they would sell a quarter of a block, or half a block, or 3/4 of a block.
How much did a block weigh?
300 pounds. And there was these big metal containers, and they were narrow at the bottom. They'd come up and out at the top just a little, not much. And the sides were the same way. Not much difference, but some. And all it was so it would slip out of there easier. So they had these things down in whatever they were using to freeze it in.
Were these boxes made out of wood?
They were all in the floor. They were made out of metal, but the floor was wood.
Okay.
And they set down in these, I reckon some kind of solution looked me like. I guess that froze it or somehow. Anyway. But they had big trolley thing that would come overhead, and you go down and hook them things and pull them up, and they could flip them upside down and dump them blocks of ice out.
Right into the hold of a boat?
Well, no, they dump them on the floor, and they would take these big ice tongs, lay them on their side. They wouldn't leave them standing up. They'd lay them on their side, and they'd throw a pair of ice tongs in them and drag them out and down a ramp to the boat, and they could load them on the boats like that. Or most of the time, they chop them up, bust them up.
So do you remember any specific boats that would come in?
No, it was mostly smaller boats back then, 40-foot boats.
From where?
Well, they come from other places, but there was several from here.
Uh-huh. Well, did any boats come from the Outer Banks?
I don't know about the Outer Banks. I'm thinking like, Swan Quarter and Bellhaven. Wherever the shrimp were, they moved back and forth. Mm-hmm. And even maybe later some come from further south and everything. But this was back there. well, in the Manio area and all too, which these boats could go on up that way and work too. But that's where most of the shrimping was done from, Manio area on south.
And obviously, this was when Englehart started to become the booming town.
Yeah,
And can
that's
you
when it
tell
really
us why did Englehart become the boom town after a while? I mean, what was it about Englehart?
Well, Middleton had been the boom town.
Oh, Middleton.
Had been.
Right.
And I've read where it was at one time the largest town in North Carolina, which is almost hard to believe. But we're talking a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, but it had a natural deep harbor. All the boats would go in there. Had it's like a big open bay there, and they called it Middletown Anchorage. And all these freight boats, so many freight boats coming, they'd come in there and they could anchor out of the wind, be protected mostly, except maybe a southeast wind would have been rough on them. But they could go in, and there was quite a few stores and buildings there and warehouses and everything. A lot of people living there.
Do you remember when a lot of people lived there?
I remember when it was more than it is now, but they said a long time ago it was quite a few people there. Mm-hmm. Real pretty houses, flowers growing in the yards, nice high. But now it's settled to people got a lot of grasses that only grow around salt water growing in their yard. But it ended up two things basically killed Middleton. Was originally they were going to direct Highway 264 down and then turn and go to Middleton with it because it was a fairly booming place. But it had shallowed up, and the people, a guy by the name of Deacon Long, owned the land on the south side of Middleton. And Nathan Northern, who lived here, who had all the money, they formed a partnership. Deacon furnished the land. Northern provided the money to dig a canal, and it was a big canal from up where Middleton community is out to the sound, because those freight boats were having trouble getting in now because of the water shallow. So they charged $1 for the boats to come in, $1 to go out. They had a booming business. So they wanted 264 to go there. So the government went to them and wanted to buy that canal, and weren't going to charge people to use it. And they said, "Oh no, we're making too much money. We're not going to sell this." So they said, "Well, we're going to go to Englehart and dig a channel." So they figured that was all they would do. But not only was the channel dug at Englehart, but the rerouting of 264 was turned from going to Middleton to Englehart. So the way you come in now, if you come by, it's way before you get Martell's, but you come around a sharp curve and you maybe saw a road to the right. There's a restaurant here. Mm-hmm. That was where 264 was supposed to turn and go to Middleton. That
today connects to Middleton?
The road does now, but it's not 264.
Yeah.
264 comes on down by Martell's restaurant and then comes on in Englehart.
So what year did they do that?
I'm thinking around the mid-20s, maybe a little before. And those two things, half the changing of the highway, half digging out the channel here at Englehart, those two things finished Middleton.
So if that was in the 20s, and then in the 30s, here comes that ice plant, which sounds like it was the hottest thing going.
Yeah.
No pun intended, the coldest thing going.
Well, a guy moved here from Virginia and started an electric company. That was a big boom. And of course, the ice plant, they haven't taken probably right much electricity, was a plus right there. They had maybe at times extra electricity they had to do something with, whatever.
Yeah.
So it worked out good, and then they started, they had the ice, so why not buy and sell their fish and shrimp and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the other day.
And there was other fish houses here, but starting by then too, so they had to, they needed ice. They needed ice too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can even remember when trucks used to come from other places here, maybe Belhaven or Stomach Point or somewhere, and they'd come here and get ice. Maybe they couldn't get enough, when it was in demand.
So when did the ice plant close?
I would say around this early 70s, maybe by 1970, something along in there.
Why did it close?
Well, by then there was getting to be other ways of getting electricity. You know, I think they started buying their electricity instead of producing it about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And just that, and easier to get ice trucked in here probably than to make it.
Today, these fish houses make their own ice, don't they?
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember many a night there'd be night mullet fishing and get caught in a bad storm or something. We'd come in, and we know we'd have to maybe get more ice for the fish to hold them till the next morning until we could get them sold. And we would stop at that fish house and go in. There was always a night watchman in that electric company part of the ice plant. And they had to sit in there and watch all these gauges and switches and those engines running and stuff. And we used to go in there and sit with a guy, get out of the weather, help keep him awake.
Do you remember who that guy was?
Oh, gosh, I think one was Dual Cutrell. He worked with the electric company, and he lived on a back road here in Englehart. We lived not too far from him at one time, but I knew him all my life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there was others too, but I remember him for sure.
Do you remember anything about the Haddoco?
Haddoco.
Haddoco was a freight boat from Hatteras that would come here. That was before your time.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Had to be.
I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah. And last time I was here, you all provided all kinds of information and sources, and it was real interesting to read some of the history of this area. And one thing that I thought was interesting was they referred to the old oyster boats as market boats. Do you know about that?
And what that part I think that is, it was a lot of oysters done here, a lot. We had a lot of oysters. All the places around here had oysters. But at one point, the oysters got scarce in Virginia because there was a pretty big deal up there too. And they used to come here and buy oysters and carry back to Virginia to plant. And I'm not sure, but I think that would be probably what those market boats were.
Okay. Yeah.
They would just go there and catch loads of these oysters and bring them in, and these people would come with boats and buy them.
Was there ever an oyster plant here that steamed them?
There was shucking houses. In fact, the earliest one was built on the water right here in Fall Creek, not far from that Indian side. I don't know if you remember, there was a day marker. We went by to go to that Indian site, and there was I can remember that pipe there until maybe 25, 30 years ago, stuck above the water, but there was a dock built out from the shore, a wide dock, and there was a building built out there, and that pipe was a well where they drove pipe down in the bottom and they get fresh water, and of course it had an old hand pump on it, but I can remember the pipe sticking up there when I was younger, but they shucked oysters right there. They built that out there so they didn't have to hurry about hauling off the shells. But this must have been after the earlier times, because most of the people wanted them oyster shells. That was a big market for that. They carried the shells to put on farms for the line.
Oh, okay.
But undoubtedly by this time, they just had this thing out there, and they just throw the shells back overboard. They didn't have to worry about hauling the shells off.
Did the farmers just throw them on their fields, or did they grind them up?
There might have been some that was maybe able to grind them up, but I can remember people used to take them, just dumping them like they were.
Yeah. Huh.
And over at Gull Rock, they said that was a huge thing too. I heard my father used to talk about it. Them boats would come in there with all these oysters, and they'd take a wheelbarrow, just put right down in the boat and load them up with oysters, and then push them up a ramp and then on out into the building to get them shut. And there was people there with horse and buggy carts and stuff, mules, ox, whatever they had, wagons, to load those shells up and go put on their farmland.
Wow. So there was a good relationship between fishing and farming here.
Yeah. In fact, almost everybody I knew when I was growing up, not everybody, but a lot of people, they fished and they farmed. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was hard to distinguish which was what. If they were a farmer or they were a fisherman.
So being a lifelong resident of this area, Hyde County, how has it changed over time in your lifetime?
It's changed a lot. See some not pretty good either, but when I was growing up, there was way more for the kids to do here than now. Of course, I know it takes more to entertain kids now, but a lot of that can be done with a TV and all that. But there's just, it's not taught in the schools the things that they need to know here to live here. So they move on, and their population is dropping because of that.
What do you think they would need to be taught to live here?
They need to be taught things about hunting, about traveling, about fishing, more than just the biology part of it. There ain't no reason this county ought to have one of the biggest shooting ranges in the United States. There's many people that come here and hunt. That'd be perfect for kids, to be able to work at something like that. It's just so many hunters here in the wintertime. It would be a good business.
To be a hunting guide?
Yeah, guides, motel management, things like that.
Yeah.
Anything to do with farming. They do have some stuff with farming, through the School of Agriculture and stuff, but there's a lot more they could do, especially with forestry stuff and commercial fishing. And they ought to have kids out there on a commercial fishing boat all the time. And they don't.
You have grandkids?
Sure.
Do they go out with you?
No, they go to follow some duck hunting and sport fishing, but Dan got it big enough for to go with me, I guess, yet. But but that's the thing. If you want to get rid of something, you make it where kids don't do it, and it does. And it can be a church. If you don't have young people in a church, it's not going to last. And it's the same way with business and entertainment and all of it. We had a movie theater when I was growing up here. There's no reason there shouldn't be some kind of a movie theater here now. I mean, I'm not talking about something big, but gosh, you can go over and rent a house on the beach and it's got a theater in it,
Yeah.
To seat 25, 30 people.
Well, can people still make a living in the old ways here as well as they used to, farming and fishing?
Yeah, it's all gotten more modernized, but it's getting harder and harder to get that labor force. And when you ain't got that labor force, you can't expand. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And people aren't trained for doing these kind of things in this area. We just had opportunity to get a drone business put in here maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's been a few years, not long ago though. But they ended up, after Hyde County doing a lot trying to get them here, because we've got an airport that's not even hardly used. And it was a perfect place for it, testing them and all. And they ended up in Virginia because there's not the people here trained even in how to fly an airplane. We got an airport. Why couldn't you have a class on teaching kids how to fly?
Yeah. Well,
or work on the engines, or build the planes, or do something.
Yeah.
If nothing else, remotes.
So do you see Englehart as a community that has declined or kind of just stayed as a status quo?
It's declined. There is nothing for the kids to do in this county, hardly. And of course, it takes a lot to entertain kids. And I ain't saying they got to be entertained all the time, but they do need a place to go, and a decent place to go.
So you're a commercial fisherman and a trapper. Have you noticed the environment change any over time?
Yeah, I believe in cycles because I see it with the wildlife populations and all, and everything. You're going to have boom years and bad years, anything you have to do with nature. The biggest thing I've seen here was this last drought. It started in 2006 and lasted until about 2013, which same thing happened 400 years ago with Jamestown. It happened prior to that at the Lost Colony. There was a severe drought in 1580. Started in the spring of 1586. The English wrote in their journals, there appears to be a severe drought coming. The Indians' crops are withering and dying on the vine. And that's in the spring of 1586. But the drought really got bad in 1587 and 88 and lasted through 89. And we had the same thing happen here. 1990s, 7, it really was bad, and 98 and 99.
So how does that, and well, 2006 to 2013 is a good span of time.
Yeah.
What happened? I mean, what are the effects?
And this is like a local friend of mine, a farmer, told me, on Hyde County, because the land is lower and stuff. You can make money on an extremely dry year in Hyde County, but you can starve to death on a wet year in Hyde County or go bankrupt.
From a farmer's standpoint?
Yeah, because if it gets so wet, and it did happen with some of the crops this year, some of them lost their cotton, they lost string beans, some of them lost some soybeans. Some of them even had a hard time getting their corn out. It was getting so wet. So, that can affect them pretty bad. I know most of them have insurance, but I don't think it covers everything.
Yeah.
And but that's looks to me like we're back in that wet cycle again. And this year, for sure, it's been unbelievable. And I think it's just going to continue for.
Do you think it's going to dry out eventually? Or do you think sea level is starting to permanently inch up?
Well, that's happening too. We know that from the English coming here to the Outer Banks, everything being a lot higher. I think, and they have these water control structures out here on the refuge, like one on this canal, and they have a tide gauge there where they take regular readings. And I remember talking with the refuge manager. In fact, he was out there at this dam, and me and my son are right there going bow hunting, loud bow hunting out there. And I was talking to him. I was good friends with him. It's been, when they first opened up the bow season on there, probably 10, 15 years ago. And they were talking with him, and I was telling him about the water rising about a foot a century for we can tell this what's going on, with the sea level rising. He said, well, it stands to reason because in the 10 years that I've been here, the water has gotten an inch higher in 10 years. So you add it out, it gets up there close to a foot. And so, if that's happening, you got the sea level rising, and the land settles as the water gets higher. If you don't believe that, take a small water hole and don't fix it.
How about the farmers?
Next thing you end up with is a big hole.
Yeah, are the farmers noticing that they're having less area to plant because of the salt?
Yeah, that is happening in some areas. I know some good farmland has been ruined by this salt from where it's dry so many years. Now there's some things they can do to help get it out. I know some of them are flooding them, digging them off and flooding them, letting them flood in the winter with water. Try to get that salt out by mixing fresh water with it. And I'm sure that helps, but I think it still takes a while to get it out.
Yeah. Have you noticed any changes in the behavior of wild animals as a trapper?
Not so much. It's just that the red wolves that come here, and that's affected the wildlife more than anything else I've seen. Our deer population, of course they'll argue the difference with you, but I think in a meeting I was in there last week, they were talking about from 10 years ago, there's 1,000 deer less killed each year in Hyde County now from 10 years ago. So that's a big drop.
That's a big drop.
And of course we got coyotes moving in, we got wolves breeding with coyotes, and we got hybrids, so we got coyotes, we got hybrids, we got wolves. And those things hunt all the time. They don't. They do very little sleep.
Yeah.
And a lot of them kill to kill.
And you see that out there, don't you?
Oh yeah, you see it. See the signs of it. What I first noticed about the wolf when they got in this area, because I hunted this area a lot, was that the deer within 2 to 3 years weren't producing 2 to 3 fawns. They were producing 1 maybe. And we noticed the deer numbers drop. And I know that weren't from all being killed by wolves, but what I noticed was the wolf is a silent chaser. And I've had dogs that went and bark chasing deer, and I'm going to tell you, they can almost catch a deer. When they come out of the woods, those dogs will be right on the heels of those deer. But now the deer would get ahead of them out in the open fields. But they still, get back up. When they went back in the woods somewhere, they'd be right back getting closer to them. But that's what the wolf does. And so you get something that's out there 24 hours a day. especially when you get more of them. These deer could not stay around. Some learned to maybe be more cautious and adapt, but the majority left the area or they died. And that's it. And what I saw with that does not having them young was stress probably. They weren't producing the amount of young that they were normally did. And it was nothing more than being chased or having to worry about something getting them,
Yeah.
Where before they didn't have that problem.
Right. Gosh.
So.
Well.
It's been a big eye opener, and this meeting that I was in was first time that Fish and Wildlife Service admitted that a lot of this stuff that they've done has been mismanagement and what's going on and all.
As far as protecting the red wolf.
Yeah, and the regulations that they put in place to allow the wolf, for us to allow them to bring the wolf here. Mm-hmm. All those rules that they put in place was thrown out the window. But come to find out, you can't throw them rules out the window. They were rules to be able to bring it here. You can't change that. So now they got to honor that. Mm-hmm. And almost everybody in this county, even if you're pro-wolf, almost a lot of them turned against it.
I can't remember why they initially wanted to bring wolves in this area.
Well, they made up this story that it was red wolves were here originally. And for something on endangered species, you can't restore an endangered species if he's not native to the area. Well, now they're finding out that, hey, you weren't here.
Oh.
Somebody made up a map. That said it was here. You got to have bones, you got to have hair, you got to have something like that.
Are they allowing hunting now of the red wolf because they're getting out of hand?
What it is, it goes back to the original thing. That if you don't want wolves on your property, they got to come catch them and remove them. Once they remove them, if that wolf comes back and you call them again, they come get it or can't catch it or whatever the reason is that they can't keep it off, then you can get a permit from them and shoot it.
How do you know it's the same wolf?
Well, a lot of them's got collars, not all of them, but they can pretty much know if the animal's back, size of the tracks, things like that. Of course, it's getting harder to tell because there's so many hybrids and all. So it's just crazy. And the coyotes are just multiplying like crazy. Yeah. And when the politics things get into it, like with the Wolf Coalition and all them that's joining with the Fish and Wildlife Service and stopped the hunting of coyotes for 2 years. Now, here they are saying out this side of their mouth, we don't want coyotes here. They were glad every one we trapped. But they turn around and say, but you can't shoot them because you might shoot a red wolf. And the population just exploded. And it took the wolf out. That's what the wolf's done. It's not because the people hunted them or shot some accidentally or on purpose. The problem is because they allowed stopping the coyote hunting for 2 years. And the coyotes took over and bred the wolf out of existence.
Oh, so you're saying that problem today is not the wolves, it's the coyotes?
Well, it's all of it. They still got a few what they call wolves left.
Okay.
But the majority of them are hybrids.
Huh. You live an interesting life here in Englehard.
It's been interesting, I tell you.
I mean, really, you're out there. You see all these things.
Yeah. And, of course, I see some things that's going on. And one thing in particular, nobody believes it. And I laugh about it. Because, anybody believe what they want. I believe what I see or what I'm noticing. These coyotes, sure, they're moving here. But if you have a wolf that, especially the male, that once he goes with a female, don't want to go back with a female wolf, he's going to go and try to find another female coyote. If he don't, he'll go back to a wolf. But that coyote don't care. It's going back to another male wolf. So say one generation, they get mixed. Let's just call it half and half. Mm-hmm. The next year the coyote goes back to to a coyote. Well, that generation we'll just say is a quarter. Mm-hmm. So then that generation goes back to another coyote. So let's say, well, he's not pure, but he's pretty close back to a coyote now. They can't believe that that's what's happening. It does happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so the wolf is getting bred out.
The wolf is breeding the coyote here.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Yes, there's coyotes moving here, But
Yeah.
we also got wolves creating coyotes.
Oh my gosh.
And they don't want to believe that. So that's
Yeah.
okay. Don't believe it.
So Marco, it looks like it's about 20 till, looking at that clock. Is there anything you would like to add for the record that you'd like to talk about?
I think you're probably more interested in Waupoppin here. So it's been a interesting thing. You know, a lot of this stuff is oral history that's been passed down. And what happened here was the Indians, even prior to the Indians here at Waupoppin, and they know I found a site here that's probably older than, or as old as Pumioc. Pumioc was the main village, and there was probably, what we've researched and all, was probably 1,000 Indians living around that village of Pumioc. Probably 100, maybe 150 living inside of the stockaded area, but that was the hierarchy, the king or his chief, and all his sons and wives and daughters. And these longhouses, there was 18 longhouses inside of Pumioc and one charnel house, a mummification house for the past dead kings. And 35 people could live in one of them longhouses. So, but then there was other Indians all around, and there's some of them probably branched off over here. And from what we're telling over there, that from what ECU done, that's a 2,500-year-old Indian village still intact.
Out there where we went?
Where we went.
And so that's out, is this called Far Creek?
This is called Waupoppin.
Waupoppin Creek.
And then Far Creek.
Far
when
Creek.
you go outside of this point right out here, you're in Far Creek.
And then we went a little bit to the, is that south?
Well, we went to the east and then cut across to the south and went up in Englehart to the west and then to the...
And then there was that island.
Well, that little island was out further.
Oh.
But we went on up more where that Indian side is.
Okay. Where we stopped and got out of the boat, is
Yeah.
that what you're talking about?
And now listen to
That's
this.
Pumioc?
That's what I say is Pumioc.
That's
and
what
I'll,
you say?
and I'll show you a picture.
Okay,
and you
so-
say where,
Okay,
what you
yeah.
think it is. But most of the artifacts that are there are the right time period for the lost colony, or for that time period. Not say the, but the English voyages, that time period, when the English first come here.
Like
That's what I'd say. Well, we use July the 12th, 1585. That's when John White says that they saw smoke coming.
But what kind of artifacts have been found there?
Oh, all kinds.
English, like
A few English. Yeah, a few English. Brick, pipes, English pipe, porcelain, things like that. But when I was telling you about Ocracoke a while ago, when they run that ship aground, they decided to take a trip to Pumioc because Manio and Wanchese was with them from the previous voyage. They went back to England with them, so they're with them when they come back. Well, Manio's with them exploring the sound. He tells them how to get here. Of course, they could probably see it, but he tells them where to go. They sail right into the mouth of Waupoppin Bay. Go up in the head of the Waupoppin Bay. Not seeing any Indians, they decide to anchor their boats. This is all the English journals, you can read this. Not seeing any Indians, they dropped anchor and slept on the boat that night. And this was probably about a 25-foot small sailing boat. And there could have been 20 people on it. Rose the next morning, still not seeing any smoke or any sign of Indians. They sail north. And they see smoke coming from a village and they stop and go ashore. Well, if they sail north, there's only two places likely, and they only come as far as Pumioc. So either Pumioc had to be at Middleton or it has to be at Englehart.
Okay.
I find two books in the Dare County Library years ago. Both of them stated, one said it was at the mouth of Far Creek, one said it was at the head of Far Creek. But the one that said the head of mouth of Far Creek narrows down again. It's like bigger, and then it narrows down again. So it could have been talking about the upper part of it, the very back of it. But either way, it's pretty close, either one.
Yeah. Huh.
And this Pumioc was a major village, and Manio knew that, and Wanchese, and they told the English, yeah, this is where we need to go. And They ended up, most of the English people that were with John White that day were not sure if he went or not, even though some paintings showed the lake and stuff that he done. They're not 100% sure he went to the lake because he draws and paints the village of Pumyart that day. He was so taken away with it. Mm-hmm. And this is the first contact probably by English with these Indians. It's possible they had some Spanish contact earlier, maybe 15 years earlier, but they're not 100% sure. And the place where they thought Pumyart was, that the state spent so much money trying to find for the big celebration for Mania and that area, Dare County, for 1985, they spent more money looking for the Native American village of Pumyart than any other Indian village in North America. It was that valuable. And they thought they'd find it up on 264 at Amity. Carbon dating showed that it weren't Pumyart. The earliest it could have been was 1640. At the latest 1680, and I think they settled on a 1660 date by the carbon dating. Yeah, they used 3, and they go for the middle one. So it couldn't have been Pumyart. Pumyart was 1585.
So you're suggesting that the Lost Colony was right off?
No, the Lost Colony was at Roanoke Island, but I'm pretty sure some of those colonists ended up here.
Oh. Okay.
And I'm pretty sure they had moved on to, or died, or were taken with the Tuscarora when the Tuscarora took over.
Maybe someone right here at Waupoppin.
Yeah, could be.
Because you found some pretty nice artifacts right here in this creek.
Yeah, and buffalo teeth and elk teeth and stuff, and people don't believe that stuff was here. They thought it was traded here. No, that was here.
Yeah, yeah.
And Indians told the English at Roanoke Island there was 2 large animals that migrated, at certain times of the year, and they disappeared about 100 years before the English came. So they were here at one time.
Wow, well that's interesting.
But with this thing with Pumyart, when I show you the picture, you'll see what. And it's a good thing we got this picture at the time, because it's before Hurricane Floyd. Before Hurricane Isabel.
Okay,
and
well,
you can see this.
Let's look at it, and I'm going to turn this off so we can go look at it. So I really appreciate this. Has been a fascinating.
Well, you got to go to the earliest thing here. The Indians, the Algonquin Indians, traded by boat, and they were going to the Outer Banks and these other Indian villages, trading amongst themselves, getting stuff and trading with the Tuscarora, who were walking into this area and trading. And the big trade item was a conch shell. They could use it to bust a hole in it, get the meat out. They could use it for a dipper, for dipping water and stuff, or they could fasten a stick to it and use it for a hoe to chop in their fields and gardens.
How about that?
So that was the main trade item. But the item that they wanted the most, that they liked the most, was jade rock.
What?
Jade rock.
From here?
No, it was brought here. That's what the Tuscarora were bringing from the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia.
Okay.
To trade with these Indians here. They wanted the jade rock. It was their favorite color.
Wow.
And they could make stuff out of arrowheads and stuff like that.
All right, well, let's go check that map out. So thank you, Marco.
Okay, you're certainly welcome.